Welcome, everyone. My name is Ben Adler. I'm a staff writer with Grist. Thank you for tuning in to this White House Google Plus Hangout. Today, joining us live from the White House, we have Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz and Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Gina McCarthy. They'll be talking about President Obama's climate action plan and taking your questions. I'm going to be moderating our discussion today. You can join in by tweeting questions with the hashtag WHClimateChat. First, I want to turn it over to Secretary Moniz to talk about the climate and clean energy work of the Department of Energy.
Well, thanks, Ben, and it's a pleasure to be here, by the way. So the Department of Energy has a number of different ways of contributing to the clean energy agenda. Perhaps first and foremost is technology development, technology research and development across the entire spectrum of low carbon options. Efficiency, I might say, first and foremost, where it's both technology and efficiency standards for which we have responsibility. And since last August, we've put 7 final rules into place. I can't help but taking a little diversion and saying that when you look at all of the efficiency standards that we expect to have completed in this administration, we'll be talking about a cumulative 3 gigatons of carbon reduction, $500 billion of energy expenses avoided cumulatively to about 2030. So it adds up. Beyond that, of course, we developed the new technologies and reduced the costs of renewables, new nuclear, environmental protection in natural gas production, carbon capture and sequestration, really across the board. And a great story is, in fact, the cost reduction that we have seen, particularly in renewables, in solar, also in LEDs. And so these costs are coming down, and we believe that we are in the revolution. We're not just waiting for the revolution to happen.
Thank you very much. Now, Administrator McCarthy, will you tell us about what the EPA is doing to address climate change?
Sure, and again, thanks, Ben, for pulling this together. Ernie, it's great to join you again. I want to just make sure that everybody is aware that the President put out a climate action plan, and EPA and DOE are really part of a larger administrative effort to address carbon pollution comprehensively. And that plan talks about mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, lowering the amount of emissions we have. It talks about making sure we work with communities so that they're resilient to the changing climate that is already happening. And then thirdly, that the U.S. gets some additional leverage in taking these strong actions in the international discussion on how do we bring a global solution to what we know is a significant global challenge. And EPA is part of all of those efforts to some extent.
Thank you very much, Administrator McCarthy. The first question that we have from a reader is an interesting one because, you know, the part of what the President has done on reducing greenhouse gas emissions is increase fuel efficiency standards for cars and SUVs and so forth. But a reader whose Twitter handle is Mel Hawaii wants to know, why has the U.S. still not enacted vehicle fuel efficiency standards on par with or better than those of the EU, New Zealand, and other countries?
Well, let me tackle that because it was EPA working with DOT through the President that we worked with the car manufacturers to actually double fuel economy by 2025. That means we're going to cut greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles in half. And that's a significant step forward. We've also taken a look at what else we can do with heavy-duty vehicles. And we're going to do a second round of reductions for those. I would argue, and I think the data is pretty clear, that we're very aggressive, and in fact much more aggressive than other countries. You have to look at how those testing standards are done and how they're articulated. But we are going to be driving technologies, not just the technologies that we see today, but the technologies of the future. I also would acknowledge that California is also moving forward with some requirements for zero-emission vehicles. And I know that DOE, and I'll let Ernie speak to this, has been very active in getting infrastructure that we need for these new vehicles moving forward.
Yeah, in fact, particularly with Recovery Act funds, for example, we did a lot of support for biofuel infrastructure and for electrical vehicle infrastructure. Also, a good example again of how we act in complementary ways. If you go to the very heavy trucks, there's Gina and Secretary Fox will be working on those rules. We're working on the technology. We have something called super trucks, and I've sat in the cab now of a Class 8 truck that had something like a 75% increase in fuel efficiency through a combination of new technologies. So we will keep pushing that envelope, and the regulations will help bring them to market.
Ben, I think the one point that I just want to add here, and you can interrupt me, of course, at any time, is that it's really important to recognize that the reason why we talk about these fuel standards and greenhouse gas standards for vehicles is not just that we work with manufacturers, but to point out the fact that our domestic car manufacturers are doing better than ever. Our union workers are getting put back on the job, and those jobs are increasing every year. And the most important thing to remember is that this is a reflection of the work that we can do on climate change and on reducing carbon pollution. We can grow the economy. We can move, as Ernie is investing in clean energy technologies moving forward. That will be a good thing, not just for our environment and the world, but for our economy as well, and keeping us competitive. And so it's a great news story all around, and something that the President clearly wants us to continue to emulate.
And if you look forward over the next several decades, just to give you a scale, the expectation is that the capital investments in clean energy infrastructure globally will average about $1 trillion a year. And so another bad consequence of waiting to address climate change would be waiting to develop those technologies that will give us a great position in terms of the international market.
Right. Now, in terms of the transition to clean energy, one thing that one reader submitted is, what exactly is your projected time frame for that transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy?
Well, obviously it's going to be a continuous process over the next several decades, as we hope that we will see the limits on greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions, go down, down, down. So, as you know, the President has set a goal of 17% by 2020. We're talking, 80% roughly by mid-century. So it'll be a transition. I do want to emphasize that it's about low carbon technologies that could include, for example, a contribution from coal with carbon capture and underground storage. Certainly, if we look globally at the kind of coal use we see in some other countries, China, India getting up there, etc., we're going to have to look at all of the options for low carbon supply and for continued emphasis on efficiency.
One interesting thing that a reader asked on that very topic is, do you consider nuclear energy to be clean energy?
I consider nuclear energy to be low carbon energy, and that's what we're talking about, low carbon. So nuclear power clearly has played a substantial role in this country. Where it's going, I would say we don't know at the moment. But what happens when, for example, Japan has in effect lost their nuclear power fleet for the last couple of years, what we have seen is an increase in carbon emissions because they replace it with gas and coal.
Right. Another question on this same topic for you is, the President talks a lot about the all of the above energy strategy, and the natural gas, which we're enjoying a boom of course, here in the U.S., and that is helping to lower our CO2 emissions because we're burning less coal, as a bridge fuel to the clean energy future. CO2 emissions are about half that of coal. But methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas. Of course, the President has a plan to limit methane leakage. But I think a lot of our readers want to know, and there was a particular question from a reader named Kay Bender on this point, why the President is so enthusiastically supportive of natural gas when it does produce some CO2 and it does produce some methane?
Well, let me jump on that because EPA has been pretty active on looking at methane leakage from both oil and gas development. And I want to just call everybody's attention to the fact that the president actually issued a methane strategy. It came out of the White House about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And part of that methane strategy was EPA moving out to take a look at developing a series of white papers which we've put out to gather data that would inform how best we could address leakage of methane in these upstream sources for both oil and gas. But it's important for everybody to know that EPA has already issued regulations. We did that, in fact, last year. That took a look at requiring green completions, which is the recapture of methane during fracking operations, which is the major source of methane leaks from natural gas in the well drilling process. And we'll keep looking at those issues and moving them forward. It's important, as I think, to emphasize, as Ernie said, this is really a progression. This isn't about turning things on and off. It's about working with industry to make sure that we're producing natural gas in a way that's safe and responsible. And I know people have questions about fracking, and I'm happy to talk about that in more depth, Ben, as the call progresses.
Well, one thing that you just mentioned the president's methane plan. Obviously, there's a plan that your agency will be issuing. The president will be making the speech announcing it on June 2nd to regulate CO2 emissions from coal-fired power plants. I think everyone watching this is probably really eager to know anything you can tell us about what those rules will look like and how strong they will be. And perhaps also you can take this opportunity to tell them a little bit about what you would like the environmental community to do to help make sure those rules are strong and that they're fully implemented at the state and local level as well as the federal level.
All right, Ben. Yeah, the rules that we're going to be putting out in early June that the president has indicated his intent to announce himself, which is a strong indication of how important he sees this. They're basically a portion of the Clean Air Act where we take a look at what technology options are available to reduce carbon pollution, and we work in partnership hand in hand with states to bring those reductions to the table. I want to let everybody know that EPA has been working really hard to understand how we can make this rule both aggressive in terms of the amount of reductions it can achieve, as well as make it implementable and reasonable for every state to really participate. And I think it's important that we get every state to actively engage on this. And one of the things we did to make sure we had that was we've been developing and carrying out a huge listening sessions across the U.S. so that we could get input. What people may not realize is that many communities, many cities, many rural areas, as well as many states have been actively engaged in efforts to reduce carbon pollution for many years. So what we want to do is learn from that effort. So this rule, when it comes out, we'll take a look at what technologies are available, what practices have been proven, and we'll take a look at providing flexibility to the states so that we get the maximum amount of reductions at low cost, and we do that in a way that doesn't threaten energy reliability or affordability. Now, people may think that's a big task. In fact, it is, but it is doable. This is a very interesting section of the Clean Air Act that really relies on partnership with the states. And we have heard a lot of very positive information about the work that we can do together and how we build this kind of momentum for the transition that we're looking for, that science tells us we need to achieve to keep our communities healthy and safe.
Ben, may I just go back with a footnote to the methane issue and just cast that in the light of carbon dioxide and non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gases. As Gina said, we have a program to work to reduce the methane emissions. We're also very, very strongly advocating internationally, working on the hydrofluorocarbons. But I do want to point out that these greenhouse gases have relatively short lives in the atmosphere. So as we work on them, we can, roughly speaking, eliminate the problem. Carbon dioxide has a very, very long residence time, so it tends to be cumulative. So we also have to keep our eye on the ball of really working hard on the carbon dioxide emissions, because they're building up an inertia that we will not be able to overcome.
You know, you mentioned the international, both of you actually have mentioned the importance. I mean, this is an international issue, and, you know, the climate talks in Paris next year will be crucial. So an international issue that a number of readers have asked about is exportation of our fossil fuels. A reader named Lori Doherty wrote in and said, recently Secretary Moniz said that the ban on exporting U.S. oil, she means refined, she means crude oil, is outdated, and that the Department of Energy could provide technical analysis for a Commerce Department re-examination of the ban. And she wants to know, how is this in any way consistent with an effective climate policy?
First of all, I don't believe I used the word outdated. I said, as has the President's counselor, John Podesta, said a few days earlier, that it was something to study. And the issue is to remember, we are major oil importers still. So the issue that was raised was simply one of, does the quality of different oil match our refining capacity? So this is not viewed at this stage as a major climate issue per se.
Right.
But that is the responsibility of the Department of Commerce. I do want to.
I think what she's getting at, though, is a larger issue. I mean, we also got a number of questions from readers about other exportation. You know, basically, as we enjoy this fossil fuel boom, I think a lot of readers want to know, what good does it do if we simply export the fossil fuels instead of burning them here? So, for example, people want to know about coal exportation and where the administration is going to come down on building coal export terminals. You know, if the coal-fired plant rules reduce the amount of coal we burn, but we ship it all to China with its or somewhere else that is growing demand, you know, how can we keep total global warming below 2 degrees Celsius? If we, you know, and 80% is a number that you mentioned, 80% reduction in our CO2 emissions by 2050. A number that a lot of our readers seem to also be familiar with is 80% of the fossil fuels currently, you know, in the ground need to stay there. And so they want to know, how does the administration's energy policy fit with that in terms of liquefied natural gas exportation, coal exportation, and crude oil too, I guess.
Let me comment first on oil, where we clearly are producing a lot more oil domestically, even as we still import a lot, as I said earlier. But we are also very heavily focused in the administration on reducing our oil dependence. And there are several thrusts. One is the vehicle efficiency standards that Gina discussed earlier. A second is advanced fuels, like alternative fuels like advanced biofuels. Third, vehicle electrification. So we are working hard to try to minimize oil dependence, even as we are now reducing our imports by producing more domestically. So we are focused on carbon reduction. Similarly, as you yourself said earlier, roughly half of the CO2 reduction that we have experienced in the United States over these last years has come from substitution for coal. And gas more globally will have, on average, the same effect of displacing coal as we drive to lower carbon emissions. Eventually, gas, you said it, gas as a bridge, eventually gas itself would need to be either phased out or have the CO2 captured if we are going to go to a very, very low CO2 emission world.
But I guess, Ben, the only thing I would add is if you read the President's Climate Action Plan, he has basically brought together a principals meeting to take a look at that and to really focus on the things that the folks writing to you are worried about. Are we consistent? Are we thinking about this holistically? And the most important thing for them to know is that the president has stood up in front of the United States and said on many occasions that addressing climate change is a moral obligation, and that he's not shying away from that. The Climate Action Plan is not shying away from that. It has international components that look at steps the United States is going to take from a policy perspective to look at investing in how coal is used in other countries. So we're getting at these issues, and we're going to marry them together, and there will not be inconsistencies. But as everybody knows, a transition is just that. It's not shut everything off on day one, because what everybody needs to recognize is, like any other environmental movement or any other economic change, it needs to get out of the gate and make progress, and we need everybody engaged. And one of the things you asked me was, how do people get engaged? Asking these questions is very good. It challenges all of us to think about how these things are aligned and how we make progress. But they're going to have to go out and keep talking this up. They're going to have to get in their communities. Every community is going to have to get active if we're going to succeed. Then the U.S. will have the leverage it needs to bring a global solution to the table.
Well, here's a potentially challenging question. You were talking about, Secretary Moniz was talking about reducing our oil dependency. So one of our readers wrote in to ask, what kind of car do you guys drive?
Actually, I luckily live in the city of Boston, and I live in D.C. So what I actually I will admit, the last car I owned was a Prius. It was a leased vehicle. It ran out while I was in D.C., so I have not released a car. I have my husband's vehicle. That's his work vehicle that I can use. So I don't own a car at this point. But it doesn't mean I'm against cars. I don't want people to think that. And I actually eat meat, so I don't want people to...
Wait, I have a serious question. Why not be against cars? I mean, they are pretty bad for the environment, even if they run on cleaner fuel. Something one reader asked also, and Secretary Moniz, you can wrap your answer to both of these questions together, I guess, is how are you trying to address suburban sprawl? And how is that? Obviously, there is the Office of Smart Growth in the EPA, but how does it relate to the Climate Action Plan?
Oh, I'd love to talk about that. Actually, I'm not against cars because I actually think many people need them, including myself, probably, when I don't have my husband's car available. But I'm a big proponent of public transportation and smarter growth patterns, so that we're living in a way that we can be as sustainable as possible. Now, the president actually, back in 2009, was celebrating its 5-year anniversary, developed a partnership between EPA, Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Transportation to address sustainable communities. That's what we call the program. It has provided millions of dollars to work with local communities to look at how we actually grow in a way that is more sustainable, more livable, that respects the need for good transportation, not just cars, but bikes and walking and public transportation, how those can be transformative and aligned with housing policies to keep housing affordable, and how you can do that, and how it's important for overall environmental goals and livability. One piece of which is clearly how you can grow in a way that reduces carbon emissions. So we've had some tremendous success across the country. I'd ask people to take a look at Sustainable Communities on their webpage. It's on EPA, DOT. It's finally a way to reach one agency to talk about these issues where you get everybody to the table. So it's a great opportunity for everybody.
Also, I would just add one other comment, which I think we need to do a lot more about, and that is going back to the issue of vehicles and the urban environment. I think we haven't really thought through the way in which we can take full advantage of a transformation, let's say, to electric vehicles. Because in addition to the questions of fossil fuel use, etc., they have another important feature: much less noise. And if we have much less noise in the urban environment, how can we integrate that into how we design communities and buildings? Maybe we don't have to shut the outdoors out so much if the outdoors is more attractive, cleaner, and quieter. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity here. And when you think about the global urbanization to like 70% urban by mid-century, this is
Right.
absolutely central to almost everything.
Right. So I take it that means you drive an electric car?
Not yet. My contribution is by driving about 2,500 miles a year.
Good for
He
you.
lives really close to his work.
That's what smart growth is about.
That's right.
For those of you just joining us, I'm Ben Adler of the green news site grist.org, and we're talking live with EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy and Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz. They're taking questions about President Obama's climate action plan, and you can tweet questions with the hashtag WHClimateChat. I have another question that comes from Karen Murphy, who's a reader who submitted over Twitter. Do you believe this? She addressed this to Secretary McCarthy, but I think you both would be interested in responding to it. Do you believe the burning of the tar sands from the proposed? She's referring, of course, to the Canadian tar sands, oil in them, from the proposed Keystone pipeline will have a negligible effect on climate disruption? If not, if you believe this pipeline will contribute to climate disruption, is there anything the EPA can do to block this scheme? And she's referring to the State Department report that found that there wouldn't be a significant increase in CO2 emissions from Keystone XL. A lot of environmentalists are very critical of that report, saying that it makes incorrect assumptions about the price of oil, in finding that the oil will be burned anyway. Critics say, no, it would be too expensive to burn that dirty tar sands oil without the pipeline. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we know that the tar sands are more carbon intensive to bring to market. The Keystone pipeline is really the purview of the State Department to make decisions on. And EPA has been, as I think people know, really aggressively commenting on the analysis that has been done around the pipeline. I think the good news for us is that the State Department has been taking all of our comments very seriously in working on this. And right now, I think you know that the final supplemental environmental impact statement is out for comment. I think we're continuing to encourage comment on that. And we're also sort of waiting and looking at what the final layout of any pipeline might be so that we can make sure to provide the most accurate comments possible.
A reader named Dan Taylor submitted a question. How can the Obama administration's climate policies be focused in a way to help struggling workers in Appalachia make the transition to a more just and sustainable economic reality? And I would just like to broaden that a little bit. Appalachia is not the only region of this country where fossil fuels are a major part of their local economy, right? And if you look at Congress, you tend to see that people who represent those areas, as well as areas that rely heavily on burning coal for their energy, for electricity, tend to be more opposed to climate action because they perceive it as being bad for their local economy. So whether it's oil, coal, or eventually one day natural gas, if when we transition away from that, how do you get people in those areas on board? How do you make it good for them economically, and how do you convince them that it will be good for them economically?
Well, okay, a few points. First of all, as I said earlier, given our absolute commitment to looking for lower carbon options, we are continuing to drive cost reduction in technologies like carbon capture for the future, and of course that's very much in accord with the draft rule that the EPA has out for any new coal plants. So that's one point. Secondly, if you look at a state like West Virginia, while there certainly has been loss of jobs in the coal industry, I believe last year there were at least an equal number of jobs added in natural gas production. And that part of that switch, again, is what has led to lower net CO2 reductions over the last several years. So the administration is certainly, and the Department of Labor, Secretary Perez, has certainly advanced training programs, retraining programs, and I think that's what we need because ultimately we are going to be shifting to what I would call a more technology-driven energy sector than a resource-driven energy sector.
This is a question for Administrator McCarthy. The EPA is currently taking public comments on a proposed rule to require companies to disclose the chemicals in the fluids that they use for fracking. I think this strikes most environmentalists as a great idea and sort of a no-brainer. So I guess what I would be interested to hear from you, since you may not actually, you're only considering it right now, you may not actually produce such a rule, what, if anything, is the counter-argument? I mean, is there any reason not to?
Well, I mean, I think we're looking at a lot of the issues related to water protection around fracking, and we're trying to do it with states. One of the questions we're asking in this document that we put out that is starting the process of looking at this is what information is already publicly available, and is it sufficient? The one thing we don't want to do is duplicate what states are already doing, and if information is available and everyone can access that, then we're not gaining much by a rulemaking. So those are part of the questions. I don't think anyone would question the fact that EPA and the state should have information available to it to protect its drinking water supplies and its water resources. The only question is, how do we get there, and how do we continue to support states who are facing these challenges and questions and make sure that the science is available to them and all tools are available.
I might just add that if the readers want to go to the DOE website, there was a report posted by my advisory board, the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, CAB, about maybe 2 months ago on Frac Focus 2. It was all about the issue of information about fracking fluids, etc. And they were pretty strong in recommending full disclosure. The argument against it from some of the companies has been trade secrets. My advisory board, I guess it's fair to say, we're not overly convinced by that, and felt there should at least be a very, very high bar to such exclusions of information. That's a different issue as to how one gets there. Yep. And I just note that even since that report came out, at least one of the major service companies has come out for complete disclosure.
But you should note that we're taking comment on the ANPRM, which is an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. We'd love to hear from people. We talk about what data we think is publicly available and ask questions about whether the gaps that we're seeing are real and how we would fill those. I think EPA has shown that it can protect truly confidential, business confidential information, and so for that reason we think it's an important discussion to have, and have as many people comment on it as we can.
Administrator McCarthy, you said sort of jokingly that just like you don't hate cars, you eat meat.
Yes.
You're a red. So we all know you're a red-blooded American and not.
I'm just a normal person that struggles with my own identity.
Right. No Birkenstocks, no tree hugging.
No, I actually have Birkenstocks. I'll admit that. I wear flip-flops to conferences once in a while too. I'll admit that. Well,
I would too if I were the boss. But one of our readers did actually write in to ask about agriculture.
Yeah.
Meat does produce more CO2 per pound of food created or per calorie of food created than plant-based food. So obviously you're tackling the bigger things first, but what, if anything, might the EPA do to address the significant emissions of the agriculture sector?
Well, I think Secretary Vilsack has been really active from the, he is the Secretary of USDA, and he has been very active in working with the agriculture community on these issues. Part of the methane strategy is to look at agriculture and how we specifically look at some methane treatment systems for wastewater, so that we can capture those, use the methane for energy generation. There's been lots of technology advances that DOE and EPA and USDA have been supporting from animal feeding operations, and small ones and large ones can benefit from that technology improvement. So we're looking at it. The agriculture community themselves is looking at different types of feedstock for the animals they are raising, and much of this is designed specifically to see how you can reduce the CO2 emissions. So there's all kinds of things going on that are being captured, not just regulations, but a lot of voluntary work is going on to try to address that issue. And you're right, Ben, we're trying to make sure that we capture the biggest sources first, but we know that we need to look across the board at how we work together to reduce emissions more broadly from every sector.
I was just in Vermont last Friday, and Vermont has the most dairy cows per capita in the United States, and it was very interesting to see how aggressively they are pursuing methane digesters on dairy farms, and it's working for the larger farms, and now it's being driven down to the dairy farms with 100 cows or so. So that's an example of beneficial conversion of that methane.
Moniz, you mentioned the need for low carbon energy as opposed to clean energy, and so for example, digging coal out of the ground and burning it will never really be altogether clean, but it could be low carbon. You were saying if you capture or sequester that carbon. A lot of our readers at grist.org submitted questions that suggested they're pretty skeptical of sequestration, and so perhaps the technical feasibility, I guess, the idea that it can be done economically, the idea that it won't leak out of the ground, which of course is also concerned with nuclear waste. So perhaps you can explain how and why you think nuclear can be done safely, and sequestration is actually feasible for carbon.
Just to make sure we're not juxtaposing words here, the nuclear waste is not going to leak out of the ground. But the question on nuclear waste remains one that, of course, we have not succeeded in closing that cycle. However, we should note that the scientific consensus remains that long-term geological isolation is quite doable. We have obviously not succeeded in getting a project put in place for high-level waste. We believe that the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission that was appointed by the administration a few years ago has some very good recommendations. Principally, we must be consent-based in how we manage nuclear waste. We should, in parallel, be consolidating spent fuel for storage before emplacement in a repository. There is a bill in the Senate that would pursue that. We hope that might eventually go through, and we could embark in this new direction.
And regarding sequestration, and this is for both of you, if we got a bunch of questions submitted on grist.org and Twitter saying, basically, you can't really believe in clean coal, can you? So just, if you do, perhaps you can explain why.
Well, again, let me just say that that there's no question that the technologies for carbon capture and for storage have been used, have been demonstrated. There's a plant in North Dakota that has already sent 20 megatons of carbon dioxide underground in Canada, it turns out, across the border. Now, the issue of continuing to drive the cost down is one that we have for many low-carbon technologies. So now, of course, in a world where we ultimately constrain carbon dioxide emissions through whatever policy mechanism across the board, changes that playing field in terms of what's competitive. Right now, for the Department of Energy, let me say that the way I see our job on the technology front is to make the investments to enable all low-carbon options to potentially be competitive in a future low-carbon marketplace. It's not for us to choose what's going to be implemented, and in fact, we would argue that it's essentially evident that the low-carbon solutions will look different in different parts of our country, and it will look different in different countries in the world, depending upon their own energy resources, etc. So that's why we think that we have to keep across the board. We have a huge focus in energy efficiency and renewables. It's our biggest budget for R&D or RD and D or RDD and D. But at the same time, we are looking for new options in the other technologies as well, as long as they're low carbon.
I think we need to wrap up, but I have one last question. You both threw out the ceremonial first pitch at a Red Sox game on Earth Day, but what we want to know is who's the better pitcher?
Wait a minute. We'll do this. How's this? You find...
We are both, despite my accent, we're both Boston.
I actually think
we're both Red Sox fans.
Pollution reduction than I am at pitching a baseball, but I'll live with that.
Right. It was great fun.
Thanks, Ben.
Good. Well, this was fun for us too. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and thank you everyone for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to ask more, but we got to quite a few, and we could have kept them here all day. I actually wanted to give you both also just a chance if you have any final comments to make. Administrator McCarthy, I think everyone was missing the sound for part of your opening statement, so perhaps you can reiterate some of that and before we sign off here.
Well, I guess I just want to encourage people to get familiar with the breadth of the President's Climate Action Plan and his real commitment to address this issue, acknowledging that there's really a moral obligation to address this challenge and take action now. And one of the key actions that EPA is taking is to put out a proposal to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants. And that's going to come out in June. And the reason why I want people to look at it is I think we've done a great job at reaching out, at understanding what we need to do, the flexibilities in the law, and how we can use that to get significant reductions that will keep our lights on, keep our energy affordable, but also address what we all know is one of the greatest public health and environmental challenges of our time.
I would just, I completely, of course, endorse everything Gina just said. Let me add one other thing that we have not mentioned in the Climate Action Plan, and that is that this year, administration-wide, we are focused on something called the Quadrennial Energy Review. The only thing I want to mention there is not the process, but this is focused on how do we develop the energy infrastructure of the 21st century that serves our clean energy economy, that is resilient against disruption, whether it be extreme weather or cyber attacks. We have a lot of challenges there, and as part of that, we are hosting at least 15 regional meetings across the country to understand the constraints, the barriers, the opportunities. So it's again along this theme as well. This administration really wants input on all of these issues, and we would look forward to that dialogue.
Get involved, comments, talk to people. If you care about climate, take action yourselves.
Thank you, and read grist.org if you care about climate. Thank you so much to EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy and Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz. I'm Ben Adler with the green news site grist.org, and thank you all for your questions and for watching us today.